let's talk about drawing skin tones with coloured pencils. It is a very large part of drawing a portrait and something that I think a lot of people think is really hard. Now I say this partly because when I was new to drawing with coloured pencils, I thought it was really hard. I did lots of research into how to draw skin with coloured pencils, and I think what I was looking for was just a list of colours that you should use for skin tones. But I don't think that you need that. I think it is not anywhere near as complicated as you might expect. It's actually no different to drawing anything else. So today I want to show you how I go about making skin tones, sort of the thought process that I go through. We'll draw a little swatch of a skin tone, and then I'll show you how that translates into a larger portrait. Now, first things first, before we draw anything, the most important thing that you're going to need is a set of swatches. I talk about my swatches a lot. Honestly, they are the most important tool that I have. Essentially, they show me what every color that I have in my set actually looks like on the paper. So I can see what I'm dealing with, and it takes away any guesswork. Now, they are something you'll need to make yourself if you haven't already. For every color in the set, you want to go from as light as you can to as dark as you can, and then label it. And I like to do this in kind of rainbow order. I like all of my similar colors where possible to be together. Now, I honestly couldn't draw without this sheet. Now, as I said, I think the easiest thing to do will be to make a little swatch of skin color, and I'll show you exactly what I am thinking of as I'm going through making this. So first up, I want to find a reference photo, and I'm going to draw this guy, just a little patch from this guy's forehead. So I'm going to want to draw a patch of skin that's going from very, very dark through to some areas that are really, really light, and then there's all of the midtones. Now, I always start, no matter what skin tone or not, I always like to start with the lightest color that I can see within the picture. So if I compare my drawing to the reference photo, the lightest color that I can see in this picture is probably the light peach. It's not necessarily a perfect match, but it's certainly the closest color that I can see in my set to this very light color. So let's start off by putting this color over the whole of the section. Now, in terms of how I put the pencil down on the paper, because this is skin, I want to try and make it as smooth as possible. There's a few ways that I go about doing that. First up, I want to be working in circular motions rather than just scribbling back and forth with the pencil. So you can see here I'm working in circle or almost oval motions to try and get the pencil down in as smooth a way as possible. Now, another thing that's really, really important when building up skin tones, or again any coloured pencils, is that we want to work nice and lightly. Because the skin tone is made up of a number of different colours, we're going to need to build up those colours through a number of different pencils. So we need to press really nice and lightly so that we are able to build this up. Now, to help me press lightly, I hold the pencil quite far back. You can see I'm holding it about halfway down the pencil rather than holding it really close to the tip. That literally stops me from being able to press too hard. Also, to help me get this down lightly, smoothly and evenly, I have a nice and sharp pencil. It is so important to keep a sharp pencil. So now that we have a base layer down, we have something that we can build on. I want to once again compare my drawing or my swatch here to the color swatches and to the reference photo to work out what the next color is that's missing. So we've already got the light peach down. I would say that the next darkest color is probably this sienna brown. It's not as light as the light peach, obviously. It is much, much darker, but we're not going to put this down as dark as the peach. And I once again want to put this pencil down really nice and lightly, just gradually building this up. You can see by building it up lightly, it's not making a really drastic difference to that first color, but it is just slightly changing it. It's making it more of a reddish brown tone, I would say, and giving it a little bit more of something. Now, as I'm going here, I want to make sure that I'm not putting a lot of the pencil on the very light areas. I do want to still be able to see this light peach. So I want to make sure I'm keeping those light areas whilst putting this everywhere that is this sort of mid-tone or darker. And what we're going to do is gradually work our way towards the darker pencils. So from here, I once again want to look at my color swatches, compare my swatches to this little drawing, to the reference photo, and work out what the next darkest color is that's missing. So from here, I think it needs a little bit more red. Not a lot more red, but it's just missing a slight red tone. So the closest color I have to that is this burnt ochre. It's not dissimilar to the last color, but it's just giving that little bit more richness. And if I decided that after putting this down, it looks maybe a bit too red, that's okay. We could tone that down and you'll see that a little bit later. From here, I can move on to the next darkest color. So now I want to really start defining the shadows that are in this section. And I want to use a dark brown pencil. This isn't the darkest brown in my set, but it is a pretty dark brown. And I once again, pressing nice and lightly, using those circular motions with a nice sharp pencil, want to mark in where these darkest values are going to go. It is looking like skin tone already, although it's not looking very rich, it's not looking very kind of deep, I guess. There's a lot more that we need to add. And once I filled in that dark brown, I can move on to the darkest color that I want to be using on this patch of skin. This is called a dark umber. It's like an extremely dark brown. Generally speaking, I try not to use black when I'm drawing skin. I find it just looks a little bit too harsh. In the really dark shadows, if I can use a very, very dark brown, I find that just looks much more realistic. So once I've got the dark brown area marked in, this shadow on the left-hand side, I once again want to compare my drawing to the swatches, to the reference photo, and think about what the main color is that's missing. So the most obvious color. So from here, actually, I can go back to a color I used before. This is, again, that reddish brown. And I want to build up some more of this color. And you can see that just adding a little light layer of that over the top of what we've got here has completely changed the color. And we're bit by bit getting closer to the color in the reference photo. I then once again want to think about the most obvious color that's missing. So the most obvious thing that's missing to me now is that the shadow is nowhere near dark enough. So let's build up some more of that very dark brown on the left hand side. And it is so important to have a sharp pencil, particularly here where we're wanting to build up a really good layer of it, and we want to try and remove those white spots. And you can see how quickly it starts building up to a really good deep shadow. So let's once again think about the most obvious color that's missing, and I'm going to go back to the dark brown. This is the lighter brown. Add some more extra shading, not in the darkest areas, but in some of the darker midtones. I think they're looking too light at the moment, and the whole swatch just looks a little bit too red right now. So let's really start building up this color. Before now, I think it looks a bit too, almost it's lost a bit too much red. So I can add in a peach color to brighten it up a little bit, and also add in maybe some less red tones, some more kind of slightly orangish tones, orangey yellow. And I'm just going to keep flicking through these colors, comparing constantly my drawing here to the reference photo and comparing that to the swatches, and just thinking about the most obvious color that's missing. And in actuality, it is a case of frequently going back to those same colors. So you add a little bit more of a kind of red, for example, you realize that you need some more brown. That then means that you need to add maybe a little bit more red or a bit of peach, and you just keep building the colors until it reasonably well matches the reference photo. And you can see this is looking like a pretty decent skin color. It's not quite finished yet, but it's not too far. So now at this point, the most obvious thing that's missing to me is the light patches are looking too light. So I can go back to that light peach that we used as the absolute lightest color and add a little bit more, build this up a little bit more. And then at this point, I think there's a bit too much red. So I'm actually going to use what's called ginger root. It's kind of a cream, but it certainly has a good green tone to it, so that I can tone down that red. This is the most obvious color that I now think is missing or needs to be used to adjust. By adding a little hint of green into something that I think looks a bit too red, because they're opposite sides of the color wheel, it kind of tones down and mutes that red a little bit. You can see it's not a drastic difference, but it is improving the skin tone. So that is essentially what I do for the skin tones for the whole face. You can see that I don't need any specific skin colored pencils, because we're just trying to get it to look as close as possible to the reference photo. Just looking at it like it's a a random series of colours. It doesn't matter that it's skin. So let's see how that fits together for drawing an actual face, a whole portrait. And this is a portrait I drew a little while ago. Now, before I show you how to apply this to a full portrait, remember, if you do want to draw this portrait with me, it is available on my Patreon. My Patreon has loads of tutorials, from portraits to animals to just a really vast array of different subject matters. Each of my tutorials includes really in-depth instructions, all of the real-time footage, details of all of the colours I'll be using, sketch outlines, and of course the reference photo. And I have some quite long in-depth tutorials like this portrait, for example, but I've also got some much faster and easier tutorials like this one. Check out the link in the description. So you can see here I'm starting off with the lightest colours, just putting something down, and then I can gradually work my way through the midtones and towards the darker colours, mapping in the key lights and darks, the key shapes of the face. Now I am putting in all of the facial features around this, and I'm also going to want to block in the hair. So what I like to do is get something down for the skin tone, something down for the face, and then I come back to it once I've drawn the rest of the portrait and adjust and work through comparing the drawing to my swatches, just like we did earlier in this video, to work out the most obvious colour that's missing. And this is actually a reasonably long process of just building up a number of different colours. Now, one thing I think is important to mention is that you don't necessarily expect the skin tone colour to be absolutely a perfect match for the reference. And to be honest, as long as you get the contrast right, it doesn't matter too much. It doesn't need to be perfect. And I think that's also something that I struggled with in the past, was wanting it to be an absolutely perfect match. Now, this same process does apply, I would say, for any combination of colours. Whether you have quite a large set, I drew this with a set of 60, this portrait, but you can also draw portraits with much smaller sets. So for example, on this portrait, it's a bit of an experiment, I drew this with only the primary colours and white and black. And you can see I've still created skin tones, admittedly not to the same degree as I did on the other portrait, but it still looks like skin tones. So you essentially want to start off with the absolute lightest colours that you can see in your reference photo, which you can find by comparing your reference photo to your colour swatches. You then want to gradually work through the midtones and towards the darker colours, mapping out the key shapes of the skin tone, because it's not all one colour. And then you can continually compare the reference photo to the swatches to your drawing to work out the most obvious colour that's missing. Now, as I said, drawing skin tones is exactly the same process as I would use for creating any colour. And if you would like to see in a bit more detail how I build up the colours, I created a whole video where we go through the real-time process. I go through exactly my thought process for mixing up a couple of different colours. So do have a look at this video here. I think if you remember that skin colours are the same as any other colour, it will make the whole thing much easier. Alright, I hope you found this video helpful. Happy drawing, guys, and I'll see you in the next one.